Hello everyone, welcome. I am Wan for Life and I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel. Today we will be covering how to set up external storage on Proxmox. So we're going to be using a generic drive and prepare it for use as external storage on our Proxmox system. Before we start, it's important that you make sure the drive you're working with doesn't contain anything you need. If so, you probably want to go ahead and make arrangements to save that off somewhere else before you start this process. So we're going to erase and reconfigure this drive. As shown on the screen, there's approximately 8 tasks that we'll be going through, and these titles will be throughout, so we won't spend too much time talking about them now. I'll give some explanation as we proceed through the exercise. So we're going to start off with step 1, identify the target drive, which I've already pasted that command here. So here's our drive, SDC. It's about a 500 gigabyte hard drive. It's the Western Digital, which is the demo drive for the purpose of this video. This SDA, which is a 4 terabyte drive, is actually my production drive, which has already been provisioned. Went through the same process that we're going to go through right now for this 500 gigabyte drive. Okay, so now that we've validated that, we're going to step 2, create the GPT partition table and partition. Okay, so why GPT? Let's answer that question right off the bat. We're using GPT because it's the modern partition table standard and the appropriate choice for this Linux storage configuration. Older partitioning such as MBR, it could work, but GPT provides a more current partition scheme without the limitations of the older standards. Okay, so let's go ahead and set it up. And I'm just going to follow these command selections, and that will give us what we want. G. And all right, so this warning is pretty self-explanatory. It's just kind of warning us that we're about to wipe it, right? So we will go ahead and proceed. That is exactly what we want to do. Enter, enter, enter. Yes. So now that that's done, we will go ahead to step 3, create and label the ext4 file system. So this is the file system we're using for this Linux and Proxmox storage. Once this finishes, we will give the file system a recognizable label and then immediately verify that the label was applied. So hence these additional validation commands. And I'm just going to go ahead and clear screen. Okay, so that's done. And I believe I'm going to need this UUID, so we'll probably verify that later on in the steps, but I'm just going to get a copy of it right now. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and proceed with step 4, mount and verify the storage. So if you notice, first we created the directory that we want to use as a mount point right here. And we mounted our file system there. Yeah, so it's mounted on here. It's the drive, SDC1, 500 gigabyte. Okay, so let's proceed with step 5. We want to configure persistent mounting. And this is where we actually need to get the UUID. We're using the UUID because the device name, the SDC1, that can change while the UUID identifies this particular file system. For example, if I were to disconnect the drive and plug it into a different USB port on my system, there would be no required configuration for it to serve its intended purpose by using the UUID. If we didn't, then that system name would possibly change and break what we're trying to set up. So we want to make that persistent. Okay, so that does in fact look like the same ID that we gathered from above. Okay, so now we are going to use Nano to edit the Etsy fstab file. Okay, as you see here. So let's go ahead and go into, actually, let me clear. Go into Nano. Okay, so as you can see here, this first line, this is my current production Crucial X9 drive. So we're just going to add a line. And as you can see, what we have here in the command example, it doesn't have the UUID, which we just captured. So I kind of have that already off to the side here. Let me get a copy of that and we will down and add that in like so. Okay, now we're going to go through these steps to save and exit out of Nano, and then we'll validate afterwards. All right, so we want to do Control O, enter, then Control X, and we're out. So let's now validate. Oh, I failed to explain why we're using no fail. We're using the no fail option because this is external storage. So if the drive isn't available when the system reboots or boots up from being powered off, we don't want the absence of the optional storage device to prevent the system from booting. Maybe I disconnected the external drive attached to another system temporarily and I had to reboot this system. Well, it would then bark and complain about the drive not being attached and potentially stop the boot up process. But with the no fail option, it should continue to boot whether the drive is disconnected. All right, so let's go down here and do our validation right quick. Okay, and it's just showing us that we have our additional line. And Mount A tells Linux to attempt to mount the file system configured in that Etsy fstab. Since it returns without an error and DF shows our file system mounted, which we see here, no such file directory, we validated our persistent mount configuration. So now we'll go on to step 6, perform a functional storage test. We'll create a file on the new storage, verify that it exists, and then remove it. Okay, so as you can see, we have confirmed that we can create data on the storage, and then we removed our test data so the drive is left clean. So there were no errors in what we initiated here. Okay, so the next step is check physical drive health with S.M.A.R.T. So S.M.A.R.T stands for Self-Monitoring Analysis and Reporting Technology. It allows us to check health information reported by the physical drive. The file system is working, but there's one more thing I want to verify before we call this drive ready. We also want to know whether the physical drive itself is reporting any obvious health problems, okay? These commands probably should have been ran in a batch, but let's just go ahead and start. Scan open. Okay, so as you can see, it did detect our SDC, and now we will display the drive information. Okay, so Western Digital, firmware, capacity, 500 gigabytes. Yep, all looks good. Obviously, S.M.A.R.T support is enabled. And let's see. Okay, so now we're going to check the overall S.M.A.R.T health. Again, overall health assessment test results passed. Go ahead and run this additional command. Okay, looks good to me. Nothing is sticking out there. Okay, at this point, we've configured the drive, made the mount persistent, verified that we can use the storage, checked the physical drive health, and left the storage clean. Let's do this final validation here. Okay, so the drive is clean, mounted. We already checked all the health. So that pretty much wraps it up. Yeah, so here's our final checklist. These are all the steps we ran through. Everything checked out. And really, I have nothing more to say at this point. So that's it. We've taken a generic external drive, configured it for our Proxmox environment, made the mount persistent, verified that the storage works, checked the drive's health, and left the storage clean and ready for use. So hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a pretty straightforward process. And we will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.